All right, we'll give it another minute or so before we kick off, just to give people time to join the session. All right, looks like we've got a few people joining, but we'll just get going in just a second. But thank you all for dialing in so far. You're right on time. All right, so I think we'll make a start just because we have a lot of information to get through this evening. We've got some great speakers lined up. Just to introduce myself, I'm Alex Eggy. I am part of the steering group for RTPI Cymru Young Planners. So we are organizing this event this evening to look at the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act here in Wales and how that applies to planners and how young planners in particular can make the most of this piece of legislation. So we have two speakers lined up for this evening, and we also have some interactive elements of the session. So at the end of each presentation, there'll be the opportunity for you to respond to some questions, really get your ideas out there. So when the time comes, we'll pose the questions to you and you can respond in the chat function through the webinar platform, and we can really get a good discussion and maybe a bit of a debate going. So we've got a few minutes for that. The program of this evening's event is going to start off with a presentation looking really at the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and giving us a little bit of the background. And then we'll go into, at about halfway through the hour, we'll switch over then to another presentation looking more at about how does this apply to planners in the construction industry in general. So I'm going to hand over to our first speaker this evening, Petranka, and she's joining us from the Office of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wellbeing Commissioner here in Wales. So I'm sure she'll give you a bit more background about that, but I'll hand over to Petranka now and we'll kick off. So thank you.
Hello, someone give me a shout to let me know if you can hear me because I had some technical problems early. So Alex, if you can hear me, do let me know.
I can hear you.
Great, and I am waiting to be able to share my screen, I think, now. But I am Pep, I am from the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner. I am from Bulgaria, which is where the probably odd accent is coming from. And I will talk to you a little bit more about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act here in Wales, in case some of you might have not heard about it. I am, one second, this is the first time I'm working with this platform. Oh, there we go. I can now share my screen. So once again, please shout if you can see my screen because I can't tell.
Yes, we can see it.
All right, just a few seconds. So there we go. So the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is the first of its kind legislation in the world, which sets out in law a duty for public bodies in Wales to carry out sustainable development, consider the needs of people not yet born in their decision making, and work towards a common vision for the future of Wales. So what this means is that they have to improve the economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being of Wales by taking action in accordance with the Sustainable Development Principle and aimed at achieving the 7 well-being goals. And the role of the Act can really be summed up in this Sustainable Development Principle. It basically means that the Welsh Government and public bodies in Wales must act in a manner which seeks to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This means thinking about the long term rather than putting a plaster over the problems we face and finding solutions that get to the root of the problem and prevent issues from arising their heads in the first place. So there are 7 well-being goals, which hopefully you can all see on the screen. These are resilient, prosperous, healthier, equal and globally responsible Wales, a Wales of cohesive communities, and a Wales of vibrant culture and thriving Welsh language. Now, these goals and these dimensions of well-being, which are the economic, social, environmental, and cultural, are interconnected. We cannot have true well-being unless each goal is met in harmony. Without equality, for example, we can't have cohesive communities, and we cannot have a healthy Wales without a resilient nature. Each goal has its own purpose and a definition in the legislation, but the inextricable links between them is what makes this a real strategy of long-term consistent well-being for the future. Now, how does planning come into this? Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has really forced us to take a closer look at the places we live and at our immediate community, as frankly, most of us were not really able to go anywhere else in the past year and a half. It has highlighted the importance of being able to access everything you need close by, the importance of our environment and green spaces, and the importance of clean air. It is now vital to use these lessons learned through the pandemic to ensure that the way we move forward is better, it is more inclusive and more centered around well-being than what we had before. And planning is such a huge part of decision making, and it has a big impact on both people and the planet. If we do it right, if it's done right, it can be a key mechanism through which we can promote well-being and address some of the major long-term challenges facing our future generations. Getting planning right can help us meet a number of the goals, and you can see here on the screen a beautiful picture of our website, which is the future of planning and the future of Wales that we imagine at the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner. Important steps have already been made to bring the planning system in Wales in line with the Act, like, for example, the new planning policy Wales, which is great, but there is still more to do. We know that there is increasing demand for land as we're facing uncertain demographic changes. We know that climate change is already having a huge impact as flood risk increases and we have extreme weather conditions. We're seeing rapid urbanization, increased health risks, and increased spatial inequalities. All of these are issues that impact and are impacted by planning. What communities want and need in the future will fundamentally change as our planet requires rapid decarbonisation and restoration of nature, demographic trends such as aging population continue, and as technology continues to change the way we live and work. And we've seen such a huge, we have monitored this in real time over the last year and a half. We've seen how just in a year, everything can change so much. And the places that are being designed and built today, the places and developments that you are designing and building today, will remain for future generations to come. So when designing them, you need to be thinking of all the people that will come to occupy them and what you want their experiences to be like. You should think of what that place might look like for the next generation and the one after that, and even the one after that. And most importantly, you should be considering how these places enhance the well-being, health, and happiness of all these generations. So last year, we published our first Future Generations report, which is a massive report of about 803 pages. And it covers almost everything under the sun. I will not urge you to read it all because very few people have. I will, however, urge you to have a look at the section on planning and more specifically the vision that section paints for the future of our places and neighbourhoods. We do have a bite-sized version of that, thankfully, which I'm sure Alex and Abby have already shared with you, so you can just have a look at that rather than the big chapter on it. What the Commissioner and all of us at the office really want to see in the future are places that cater to everyone's needs and reduce inequality, places that connect everyone to where they need to be and that promote healthy behaviours and enhance mental health through access to nature, to culture, and that promote Welsh language and heritage. We want to see 20 or even 15 or 10-minute neighbourhoods, dream big. And these neighbourhoods need to be car-free and designed around people rather than transport. They need to have digital infrastructure that allows people to work from anywhere and remain in their communities and with their families. And importantly, we want to see planning that not only protects but enhances our nature and biodiversity, and that helps decarbonize other sectors through green infrastructure. Nature-based solutions in this vision will be the go-to approach, and infrastructure will sit within and support our environment rather than dominate it. And you can see some beautiful pictures, I think mostly from Singapore here, that illustrate, how buildings can sit within nature rather than dominate it. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and well-being considerations will be at the heart of every infrastructure design, of every development, and every planning decision. And we will have a planning system that works for people, nature, and wildlife. And that's kind of the ideal case scenario that we imagine in 2050 at the Office of the Future Generations Commissioner. So what needs to happen to get this vision set out in the Act is we need radical and bold solutions, and we need people who understand the Act and its aim and want to work towards it. But we also need leadership that enables people like you to go beyond the business as usual approach and find new solutions and innovative approaches to future problems and to current problems, obviously, but also to future ones. And that is what we're calling for the Welsh Government, for you, and for everyone else involved in planning to help make a reality. And here are some of the many recommendations we have made, but these are kind of the big ones we're pushing for at the moment. We want to see green infrastructure as part of every new development in Wales. Leaving space for nature and biodiversity should be the baseline and not just something that is nice to have and to add on at the end of a project. We're seeing some action here already with some local planning authorities like Caerphilly or Swansea preparing green infrastructure strategies, but we really need to see how these strategies pan out and translate to action on the ground. Then everyone should be able to access green space. That's another massive one, within 300 meters or 5-minute walk, depending on how fast you walk, of their home. It shouldn't matter where you live, whether you're in a city or you're in rural Powys. Everyone should be connected with nature. Sustainability and placemaking should be at the heart of decision making. Communities and well-being should be at the center of planning, and this needs to be reflected in funding decisions. So Welsh Government need to put, their money where their mouth is, because we have some great policies, but planning needs to be invested in order to make all of these great policies a reality. 20-minute neighbourhoods, they're quite self-explanatory. Paris and Melbourne have already expressed great ambitions in this field, and we're already seeing, impressively enough, some ambition from public bodies here in Wales, with Brecon Beacons wishing to centre their revised local development plan around 20-minute neighbourhoods. And if they can do it in a rural setting, then there is no excuse for other public bodies that have better conditions really for these 20-minute neighbourhoods. Now 20% tree canopy covering every town in Wales by 2030. The National Forest commitment in the National Development Framework is a positive step, but we need to make sure that the urban areas are not left behind and that this is done at pace. Singapore, for example, set aside hundreds of acres and planted 3 million trees for an urban garden that acts as the lungs of the city. That is the type of action we need to see more of. And as I said, we saw some beautiful pictures from Singapore in the previous slide. And finally, the way we live has changed so much just in the last year, with more and more people working from home, which will inevitably lead to changes in the way we view housing. We need to think of innovative ways in which we can enable intergenerational housing in communities. That's even more important with the current housing crisis ongoing in Wales at the moment. So how can you use the Act in your work? So one of the main elements of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act are the 5 ways of working. These are some very simple, very straightforward, and if you ask me, really just common sense principles that everyone should think about when making decisions and starting new projects. So the 5 ways of working are involvement, long-term integration, collaboration, and prevention. And it's quite, what it says on the tin. They have definitions in the legislation, but they're pretty self-explanatory. No doubt some of you, like Alex, are already familiar with them and are utilizing them in your work. But there are, here are some suggestions as to how you might wish to use them in the future to align your projects closer with the Act. So when starting a project, think about what does the future look like? How can you ensure that places are adaptable to future trends and fit for future generations? Can you co-design with communities? Can you bring communities into the design to design their own neighborhoods? Can you share knowledge, experience, and expertise with others? How can you design places that address current and future trends like inequality, air pollution, climate change, aging population, you name it, there's plenty of problems really to address here. And finally, when building a development, how are you thinking about what's around it? So if you're building a housing development, are you thinking about the school provision around it? Are you thinking about active travel and how people are going to get to these houses? And if there isn't such a provision, how can you make it happen? How can you help design this, just a neighborhood, not just a housing development? I don't think any of us underestimate the massive task that's ahead of us. But if we pull all of this together, there is a chance here to put Wales on the map when it comes to a future-proof approach to the built environment. So the challenge for you and your sector is, how can you be visionaries? How can you improve people's lives, not just today, but for generations to come, through the work that you do today? Finally, I have been told I can ask you some questions to think on today. So apparently my questions are not really fit for a poll. So if you can put your answers in the chat, that would be great. My first one I stole from Alex, who was just making a suggestion, but I thought it was a brilliant suggestion. So what do you feel is the biggest barrier for planners when looking for ways to use the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act in your work and to think about well-being when designing infrastructure? Next is something I touched on a little bit in some of the previous slides, but what do you think the role of planning is in reducing inequalities and planning places fit for everyone and adaptable to changing demographics? And finally, we know that trends like climate change, demographic change, automation will impact the way we live in the future. What do you think are other future trends that will have a big impact on planning in the next 25 years? So I'd love to hear, your answers. I'm not sure if anyone else can speak on this platform, so I'll read your answers in the chat. And if you have any questions about the Act or this presentation, I will do my best to respond. So thank you, diolch and благодаря, which is the Bulgarian version of thank you. And I will now attempt to stop sharing my screen, but I don't know if I will be able to. So hopefully Roshan can help me with this.
All right, thank you so much. So it sounds like those are some excellent questions, and I'm already typing away at my response to to a few of them, but I'd like to open up the floor now to anyone who is watching tonight's webinar. Please go right into the chat box there and share your ideas, share your views on the way you think we should answer the questions that have been posed. And hopefully we'll have about a 5-10 minute little chat around some of the responses to those questions that are coming through. I think we've got a lot of food for thought in this. So please feel free. I'll give you a few minutes to respond to those right now.
While we're waiting for other responses, Alex, do you want to share what you think about those questions in terms of, in your work, what are the barriers that you have encountered?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I just sort of dashed that into the comments box just there, but I think I can absolutely elaborate on that. I think one of the challenges and the barriers that we face is actually sort of getting senior colleagues on board to change the sort of business as usual that a lot of people have been used to over the course of their whole careers, and it's really changing those the norms and the way that we do planning. So I think people we need to kind of bring them along with us and change their views about how we can do these different planning processes to really make the most.
Yeah, and that's something that it's not limited, unfortunately, to to your sector. We've encountered it in, in all of the public bodies, really. There is always people who have been doing this for 30, 40 years in one way, and they do not want to kind of see that there's a new wind blowing. So sometimes they feel like the Act is promoting, I've heard this argument from a lot of people, that the Act is pushing an environmental agenda and trying to sacrifice the economy for it, which is not the case. The Act is promoting this harmony, really, and balance between considerations to ensure that economy is not trumping everything else, but it is in no way trying to kind of remove the economy from the equation. But I guess educating and making people understand this is the difficult bit that you and ourselves are really facing. I can see Kate has but a major barrier at the moment is the viability on a lot of the larger strategic sites. It is disappointing as a young planner to come up against viability so often when I and others are passionate about creating better places. Now, I'm not a professional planner, so do you want Alex to kind of help me understand what is the
Yeah,
viability issue that seems to come up on a lot of these large planning?
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's an issue that a lot of us planners can definitely empathize with. It's really the challenge of the very thin sort of balance that all the developers feel that they need to strike between how much they're spending to make a site, worth building on for them, and the money that they can make back from it. And if they need to be building in a really for the in this case, maybe an environmentally sustainable way that is probably potentially, they think, at least more expensive. So for them, their profits, they're looking at those margins quite closely a lot of the times, which is, understandable. I think what's great about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act is it kind of opens your mind to all the different ways you can calculate value. So it encourages us to look up beyond just that economic value, and in sort of the short term, quick win, how much money can you make right away? Looking a little bit more in terms of the long term, actually, when we're looking at outcomes for our communities, building in, a certain way might actually, over the long term, save you money if you're even worried about that outcome. So I think that's a barrier that a lot of us do face, and it's about how do you bring those developers kind of on board. I mean, what powers do we have within the planning system to do that?
Yeah, and here I feel that a lot of leadership has to come as well from public bodies and Welsh government, because if they make it, not so much more expensive to build sustainably, if they equate this, if they make it more expensive to build unsustainably, then that issue kind of disappears and developers will want to build sustainably. So it is it sounds like a massive issue. I can see some more answers here. The price of the land has been agreed before the planners get involved, which is the biggest influence on viability. So a big change I can already see is the need for electric car charging as a change from climate change. Many schemes have had to redraw whole site layouts of hundreds of houses to ensure wires don't cross pavements. Such a small introduction of infrastructure is causing huge changes. Yeah, question.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point as well, to note that um, the way we're responding to climate change is actually influencing design and the way that different developments are actually designed as well. It looks like we've got some other answers coming in as well. One of the barriers is awareness and understanding of the Act. I think
Oh, tell me
absolutely.
about it. I agree completely. We have had, obviously we are trying to do what we can in the office, but there's only about 3 of us. So we have had this conversation, I think, quite a few times with colleagues in Welsh Government about needing to train people in the Act and needing to educate people a bit more, because if it is to be the framework that surrounds all other decision making, people need to be more aware of it and to understand it a bit better. So yeah, as who is this? Abby, hello Abby, says we are trying to make our, our products as accessible as possible, but we also need to make sure that they reach the right audience. And I'm sure Paul will mention something around that in his presentation, but we're hoping to work on a similar bite-sized product really for the construction sector, which then Constructing Excellence Wales can help us disseminate amongst the sector to reach more people who have not heard about the Act.
And I think that's a great point as well about what we as young planners can do. And it's really about how do we share our understanding of the Act with our senior colleagues or other people that we work with, and really having sort of that word of mouth spreading within the profession. I think that's why it's really important for these sorts of events to happen and for people to start these discussions. We've got another good question through actually from Josh, who wrote in terms of the 20% tree coverage in every town and city by 2030, he notes that sounds very ambitious, especially in urban places. And he just wants to ask, in what ways do you see this goal being delivered? And do we actually know what the current level of tree coverage is? This might be a bit more specific than off the top of your head.
It is a bit more specific, so I'll have to come back to Josh with that. We recently, though, Josh, if you're interested, we recently published a document called the Future Fit Programme for Government that kind of elaborates on some of these recommendations and gives a bit more detail around, say, I think National Nature Service and tree coverage and how we should be, everything we do from now on should be, like, we shouldn't have just green industries, but everything we do should be green anyway. So I think there is a bit more detail in there, but I will have to double check and come back to you afterwards if that's okay. I can't see this question, so maybe my chat is broken somehow.
So this one actually went through the questions function, so this one's hidden from the chat. But yeah, thank you for that, Josh. No, it's a really good way to keep the discussion going. But I think we are now going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to hand over to our next speaker. We'll have time at the end, for some more questions after our next session as well. So if there's anything you really want to get off your chest, feel free to keep typing it in the chat, and we can always come back around to it at the very end. But I'm going to hand over now to Paul Malefant, who's joining us from Mott MacDonald and also representing Constructing Excellence Wales. And I'm sure he'll tell you more about all of the different hats he wears and all the plates that he has spinning in our next session. So I'll hand over to Paul.
Okay, thanks very much, Alex, and thanks very much, Petranko, as well. Hopefully you can see my screen and hear me speaking.
Yes.
Excellent. I would just say I also can't see any comments in the chat. I could see the 3 questions that were posed, but I couldn't see any responses, so I might need some help when it comes to my section at the end to translate for me if you can see them and I can't. Hi everyone, my name is Paul Malefant. I'm the Development Director for Wales for Mott MacDonald, and I'm also the Chair of the Board of Management of Constructing Excellence in Wales. My focus, my section is going to be on the construction sector. Of course, all new construction needs planning consent. All significant change to existing infrastructure and buildings needs planning consent. So there is an inextricable link between the two. So this is what I'm going to quickly gallop through. So looking at what is construction is important. Construction for future generations. 2 key imperatives is shovel ready, the same as shovel worthy. Placemaking in future generations. Triple access planning for accessibility. Well-being in business cases. Construction productivity. Carbon reduction hierarchy. Modern methods of construction designed for manufacture and assembly. Beneficial outcomes of mainstreaming DFMA, but some of the barriers as well. Some hot off the press work that we're looking at now on a development of a possible standard for construction, on a future generation standard. And then I've got my 3 questions at the end. I haven't got a lot of time, so I better get on with it. This is a plaudit that I received from Sophie Howe. I'll not put it up here to say how good I am. I'm putting it up here to just highlight those words at the top. The construction sector plays a critical role in addressing some of the significant challenges we face and building a Wales fit for future generations. So this sector is a very important element of what we do. To put it another way, construction is a well-being enabling sector by delivering a built environment fit for future generations. A couple of years ago, I started looking at the word construction, and I wasn't really comfortable with the definition, because if you look in most dictionaries, online or in paper form, it basically just says we build stuff. It doesn't even say that we look after it afterwards, but it says we build stuff. And I didn't think that that was good enough. I felt that we needed a purpose-driven definition of construction, not just that we built stuff, but why did we build it and how did we build it? So in workshop mode, we, a couple of sessions looking at different definitions, different groups came up with different definitions, and we put a word cloud together at the end. And this was totally unadulterated. This is what came out of the system. And you can see smack in the middle there, construction is about people. We do this for people. We create places, we do it sustainably. Yes, there is economic viability, but we must be looking at the circular economy. We've got limited resources, we've got global challenges, all those sorts of things are coming in there within the definition of construction. So construction should be delivering on all of those aspects. A couple of years ago, I developed or I wrote the foreword for the Constructing Excellence in Wales Construction for Future Generations prospectus, which is on the right. The left is a version of the foreword that I used at MIPIM, which is the world's leading real estate market event. It's held in Cannes in the south of France, or used to be before COVID hit. And out of that work, I highlighted my views on two key imperatives that we all must be looking to try and deliver, ideally at the same time. The first is, I've called it, retain a habitable earth for all future generations, to positively respond to the impact that humanity is having on earth, ocean and atmospheric processes, and the planet's ability to sustain resources and species for future generations. To put it simply, the greatest social outcome we could possibly deliver is to maintain this planet as a habitable place for our species and others. The second imperative is quite simple: support people and communities to thrive, to maximize societal, community and individual economic, social, environmental and cultural well-being in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Earlier on this year, I then had a look at this problem that I felt that we were having, that everybody was talking about, oh, we've got to build back better, we need to start building, we need to recover from the pandemic and so on, and everybody was talking about things needing to be shovel ready. We wanted projects that we could start now, start building now, and I'd question that, because the issue here is not necessarily just having the projects that are ready, but they've got to be the right projects. They've got to be the right projects, designed and built in the right places for the right reasons, and designed in the right way. And to do that, they would then become shovel worthy. And one of the first things that you have to consider before you're looking at a new project is, can you reimagine, reuse something that we've actually already built, rather than using even more of the Earth's limited resources? If we look at planning policy 11, two of the key constructs that came through initially, I think in planning policy 10, was placemaking in the future generations. So Petranka's touched on all the goals and the ways of working and so on in the Future Generations Act on the left, and on the right, and on the left is the Wales Placemaking Charter that Mott MacDonald signed up to. And in there are 6 principles for people and community: movement, public realm, location, mixed of uses and identity, all very positive principles which to follow. But I'd like to just pick up, I just want to have a little bit of a session talking about accessibility. So I'll flag up here, particularly on location and movement. So location: places grow and develop in a way that uses land efficiently, supports and enhances existing places, and is well connected. This starts to bring in the 20-minute or 10-minute area that Petranka was talking about. And then movement: walking, cycling and public transport are prioritized to provide a choice of transport modes and avoid dependence on private vehicles. So those are 2 key constructs there. But in transport planning terms, I wanted to flag up that actually there's a third arm, as it were, of accessibility, that is not considered within placemaking, and there's sort of a reason for it as well. And that's where we start talking about triple access planning for accessibility. So the diagram on the left talks about the triple access planning. So there's the land use system that's linked into location, the transport system that's on the physical mobility, but then of course we've got the telecommunication system that we're using right now and that we've been using one heck of a lot in the last 15 months or so. And the impact on COVID that you can see there is that the transport system became, relatively speaking, unimportant. But the spatial proximity, the place that we were living in, where you could go and do your shopping locally and so on, became very, very important. And the digital connectivity was even more important again. And it's interesting for certainly for someone of my age to look back and say if the pandemic had been triggered by COVID-89, so that 1989 variant of COVID, that was the year that the World Wide Web was actually invented. And I'd already been married for 4 years. But how would we have coped with the pandemic if we'd actually had the similar problem back in 1989? So in COVID times, we have to look at, and modern times, we have to look at transport planning from the point of view of a new paradigm. And so out goes the demand-led supply, the reactive stuff, predict and provide. E.g., a great example is congestion on the M4 around Newport. What have we got to do? Build another motorway. That's what the story had always been. And Sophie Howe herself put forward evidence to the inquiry about the M4 motorway corridor around Newport inquiry, saying that the Future Generations Act hadn't been fully considered, and in fact setting the whole thing up for a potential judicial review. The First Minister solved that problem by cancelling the M4 corridor around Newport, and that was linked into a new way of looking at transport planning. The supply-led demand, a proactive approach, decide and provide, decide on our preferred accessibility future and the outcomes that we want to generate, and provide a means to move towards it in a way that accommodates the deep uncertainty ahead. For example, on that, with the M4 corridor around Newport, instead of responding to congestion by building a new motorway so that more cars can go there, you actually say, how can we reduce the dependence on the car? So that people actually don't need to be sitting on the motorway in the first place. So quite a different approach. So the transport and accessibility for goods, services and other things is quite a different approach nowadays than it used to be. And adding into that, this is work by Alex Eggy herself, the award-winning Wellbeing Impact Evaluation tool. That's used to embed consideration of the well-being goals in transport appraisals, business cases for transport infrastructure, so that instead of just basing a business case on economics or maybe the delivery of a transport objective, such as a more reliable journey times, we're bringing in consideration of well-being, consideration of achieving the goals that we've set out in the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. So hopefully that goes a significant way to starting the journey into making sure that we're only building the right things and then obviously in the right places, thinking about the design in the right way. Switching topics, I just wanted to have a look at something else with construction productivity as to where I'm starting. So here's a quote from the Treasury, November 2020. Construction is one of the nation's least productive industries, and the built environment is a major contributor to greenhouse gases. So clearly, construction is a sector that has to change for the benefit of future generations. It's the least productive industry. I do have a slight problem with that because a lot of the productivity gains that the construction sector has had has been by moving things to the manufacturing sector, and I'll touch on that a bit more in a second, so that it's not measured. So it probably is a bit more productive and a bit more innovative than people would say based on ONS statistics, but it's still a big contributor to greenhouse gases, and we need to transform and modernize the industry, and clients can help with that. And if we look specifically at carbon, phenomenally important aspect of the current global crises. This is some work done by Mott MacDonald in 2013, looking at carbon reduction hierarchy. So if you want in the construction industry, you want zero emissions, then quite simply you build nothing. But if you want to achieve maybe 80% or more, then you look at this DFMA idea: build less, maximize the use of existing assets and improve performance. DFMA, Design for Manufacture and Assembly, can create a wide-ranging catalogue of standard components used in multiple applications, the platform approach. So it's a different way of designing and building a building. Instead of having all of it designed and built from scratch with a large number of people on site, you start to build from components that have already been designed, that are manufactured in a factory and then taken to site for assembly. And you look bottom left-hand corner here, you can see the best gains, the biggest gains can be made at the planning stage. Then that's not just town and country planning, that's the planning for the whole success of the project. So modern methods of construction and design for manufacture and assembly. The construction playbook has highlighted that this is the way that the industry should be going. Modern methods of construction is quite a wide-ranging term, but it's off-site manufacture. A lot of it moving to construction hubs. And as described at the bottom there, if modern methods of construction has been set as the goal and defines what we are seeking, then design for manufacture and assembly, DFMA, is the process that describes it. This is all about industrializing the construction sector. Construction is one of the few sectors that has as yet not been industrialized. We all know about industrialization of the automotive sector, the construction sector. We haven't done it yet. So looking at beneficial outcomes of mainstreaming this industrialized process, it drives sector innovation. It increases the speed of project and program delivery, which can have its benefits. It improves productivity of the sector and reduces capital cost, increases the predictability of that money, the capital employed, produces better quality assets and better outcomes. It helps us develop world-beating skills, techniques and products which we can then export. It strengthens the construction sector's contribution to economic growth. It supports a green recovery because we're looking at lower carbon, and it drives out waste and associated carbon. And then it also supports an equitable recovery from the pandemic crisis that we're in now. So it's looking at creating jobs. It's looking at boosting local economies and recirculating the Welsh pound, enhancing workforce health and well-being because they're working in a factory. Many of them will be working in a factory environment rather than in a construction setting. More inclusive workforce, people who maybe have caring responsibilities, who couldn't go and work in a construction site that's 100 miles away and having to stay in bed and breakfast, might be able to still go down to the local manufacturing hub and contribute. Better social benefits through our asset life of social infrastructure, future-proofing by creating flexible assets to support reconfiguring, expansion or downsizing. So instead of having a product that when you get to the end of its life, you've got to knock it down and start again, you can actually reconfigure it, you can reuse it, you can even move it to another location. One of the venues for the 2012 Olympics was actually reused in the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow. They just lifted the whole thing up and moved it. And then enhancing the ability for owners and operators to manage assets through provision of a digital twin. It's all designed digitally, so you know how to manage it and look after it because you've got that digital twin. But there are barriers, and none of these are technical. But this is focusing specifically on the residential market. I won't go through them all, but you can see them there. But bottom right-hand corner, number 10, planners and planning system are not aligned to accelerating delivery opportunity. So there's an issue there that maybe the planning system is actually not quite ready for this, but actually we do need to do it because it's a way of the construction sector driving down carbon and producing enhanced social outcomes. And finally, just a quick piece on a future generation standard. We looked at this constructing excellence a couple of years ago, and we realized that if we looked at all the wellbeing plans that were developed by the 44 bodies named within the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, it actually didn't help the sector very much because a lot of those wellbeing objectives were all about service delivery rather than the the construction. It was all about what services were delivered from the assets that were created by construction rather than creation of the assets themselves. So we started a discussion, a very general discussion about, well, what could we do as a sector? Could we set some ground rules ourselves? Or should we just leave it to be measured on a project by project basis? And literally within the last couple of weeks, I've pulled together a group and we've started to sit down and say, what do we think we need to do to try and inspire the construction sector to deliver more in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act? And I've just put down there my contact details and my LinkedIn details. If you would like to send some ideas through, I'd be pleased to hear them. That, I think, is the end of my presentation. So I'm now going to switch on to the questions. I've got them on my slides here. So at the moment, unless someone tells me to stop, I will continue to share. So this is something for the chat. As I said to Alex, maybe you can help me here. This first question actually doesn't help us on a poll. The second two do. But simply, your views on the chat. At what stage of scheme development should planning for enhanced social outcomes commence?
Right, so if anyone has any ideas, when do you think we should start thinking about the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act? When we're looking at a project, no matter kind of what type of project you're thinking of, just write that one down in the chat and we can get a bit of a discussion going on that. It's not a trick question, even though it kind of seems like it.
I'm not that tricky.
No.
No, I've given some clues.
There we go. We've got one that's come through already. It says, at the very start, conception stage, really. And this comes from Petrenko. So she did the first presentation and she says she's probably a bit biased, but I think that's definitely the one I would have said as well from the very beginning.
I think that's spot on. The last thing you want to try and do is retrofit well-being. You can make a difference if you do that by retrofitting, taking something that's already everybody's decided on all the the stuff that you're going to do. But it is a retrofit and it's therefore not going to be everything you can do. It might even be only stuff that you can really achieve through corporate social responsibility activity. But if you start at the beginning, you can make sure, I don't know, let's pick a topic, concrete, one of the worst materials to use from the point of view of impact on greenhouse gas emissions. What can we do to try and reduce the amount of concrete that we actually use? Well, you're not going to make that decision when you've already decided how much concrete you want in your building.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, it's about thinking about things a little bit earlier on in the process and actually trying to prevent these issues from happening in the first place. Absolutely agree.
And of course, I think prevention is one of the ways of working.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I would say as well. Sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, carry on. I'd finished. Sorry.
Okay. I was just going to say, as planners, I would say as well to the audience listening, that's really something that we have the opportunity to do. If you're working on, planning policy, that's a really great way to sort of set the tone early and to sort of set those requirements out within planning policy, to require those changes to be made kind of at the earliest stage. So.
Okay, let's go on to the second question, which is a poll question. So this will allow you to respond to the poll. I think something might flash up in front of you. So there we go. What is the greatest facilitator of sustainable development? Is it the planning system? Is it building regulations? Is it the Future Generations Act? Or is it something else? Now in the poll, you can't define it in the poll. So if you want to go for that option, just put something down in the chat as to what you think that other thing might be. Again, no trick question here. So just getting your views.
All right. So it looks like so far, 100% of the responses say the planning system. We might be a little bit biased because this is a Young Planners event. Does anyone have think it might be one of the other options? or do you want to write in the chat why you think it's the planning system? Why do you think that that's such a great mechanism to facilitate sustainable development? I'd say if I was going to respond to the poll, I would also say the planning system. And just my view on it would definitely be that the planning system gives you the opportunity to sort of balance building regulations with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, and then as well a whole host of other sort of technical disciplines as well. The planning system opportunity to really bring all that together. Yeah, and someone has just written into the chat box as well that because it considers a wide range of factors and is at the earliest stage as well of the project. Exactly. So it has that multidisciplinary focus and then also that opportunity to get in early. So it can really facilitate that from the start.
I'll put a challenge out there. The planning system, how early do you actually think that it comes into a project development? Because we've got the the local plans which set out what you can build, where, what type of development, and so on. And potentially, you might not see anything then until a planning application arrives if you're the local authority. So where are you actually influencing anything? There's going to be a consultation process, certainly, but there's probably some decisions that other people are making earlier than that that are going to be influencing things. Maybe clients who have particular aspirations. So if they're not providing the leadership to actually drive towards a product that they want to develop, a scheme they want to develop that is fit for future generations, then maybe we're already on the road to developing an idea, a concept for a scheme that actually is not yet embedding the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in its thinking.
Yeah, we've got a response that's come in and they said not early enough at the project stage. And proposers or people making the application need to engage and involve communities much earlier in advance of submitting the planning application. Definitely agree with that post as well. Yeah.
One of the things we're also seeing now is financiers turning around and saying, do you know what? We're only going to fund projects that are sustainable. So those with the money are maybe starting to drive behaviors, and even users are turning around and saying, you know what, we don't want to use a building like that or a product like that. So we're gonna say that we don't like it. So there's a whole load of different aspects of this. And the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, of course, it is a legal requirement in Wales to deliver on those 7 goals. But actually, it's only predicated on, only focused directly on the 44 named public sector bodies. The private sector, at the moment, apart from the fact that they have to have planning permission, they have to champion it through, they can play a different game. So the bottom line is that this is actually not a straight question. There are lots of different answers depending on the perspective that you're looking for. But there are a lot of people, a lot of organizations involved in making sure that sustainable development actually occurs. And one of the greatest bodies, I think, is the population. I think we need to demand it. We need to demand it of our governments and of developers.
Absolutely, yeah, making that opinion heard.
Okay, I'll just quickly put up then my last question, which is also a straightforward poll question. In 2017, Professor Stephen Hawking, one of the great thinkers of our time, said that humans must find another planet to live on within 100 years or face extinction. Just a simple question. Is that plan A or plan B? Plan A, find a new planet.
I didn't see Elon Musk anywhere in the attendees, so I think we'll get his view on this. I think he might have a more controversial view, but
he may do.
Yeah, we've got so far the responses are skewing 100% towards Plan B.
Yeah. Finding another planet has got to be Plan B. We've got to look after the one we've already got. We have to change as a society, as a human society, we have to change the way that we do things to ensure that this planet remains habitable by the human species and other species, and that it's our living here is sustainable. By original profession, I'm a geologist, and I made the error of when I created the school's geology challenge. The first year we did that in 2010, I set the topic of how can geologists save the planet, and the then president of the Geological Society taught me a lesson, because he said, geologically speaking, the planet does not care whether we're here or not. We're just an irritation on its surface. So we've got to remember that actually the people who care is us. We care. We want to live here. We want to continue to live here. We want to thrive. We want to live in a nice environment. So we need to demand better from all organizations and all people who drive development and drive business and every other aspect of society, to make sure that we have a future fit for future generations, which includes my 2 grandchildren and any others that come after that.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic note as well to sort of start to close today's session. I think that's very thought-provoking. Thank you, Paul, for the questions and the presentation. I like to thank both of our presenters very much for sharing their thoughts this evening with us. So if anyone has any final questions or comments, you can pop them in the chat now. And thank you so much for attending. This has been really a great opportunity to discuss the Wellbeing Generations Act and get some good ideas going. So thank you so much. It sounds like the webinar will be sort of coming to a close in a few minutes, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks both.